Welcome, everybody. I am so pumped to have you guys here. We are going to have a fun conversation today about AI powered payments. And I know what you're thinking, payments, fun? But I promise it can be, especially when you let the AI overlord do all the work for you. As long as we set up some very important guardrails, right, Baxter?
Guardrails, critical word.
Yes. We're not going to just let AI run amok.
Civic structure in place to ensure it doesn't run amok. But no, thanks everybody for joining. The goal today is really, it's your time, it's not our time. So if there are areas that you want us to double click on, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. But if there are areas that you want to focus on, just share it in the chat and we can go from there. So brief introduction on myself, Baxter Lanius. I'm the CEO and founder of Alternative Payments. We're here today to talk about AI powered payments. I think the big message today is this, right? Finance and payment automation is just a massive opportunity for MSPs. The massive opportunity that a lot of people have forgotten about and not focused on, right? A lot of people are very focused on service delivery. They're very focused on the AI workflows that we think of as upstream from the invoicing, billing, and payments workflow. But a lot of the payment opportunities within AI are actually much easier to action. They take a lot less time to action, and they're easier to integrate and implement. And so with that, really what I want to talk to you today about is kind of three main areas. But please, if there are items that you want to double click on, I'd rather riff and have more of a conversation and address what you guys want us to address than stick to this game plan. So we'll quickly give you kind of a brief overview of alternative payments, which is our business. We'll talk a little bit about the finance landscape for MSPs, what's happening today, where are the areas of opportunity, and then we'll jump into kind of more automated AI solutions. This whole industry is obviously at a massive influx. Every MSP is trying to figure out, how do you implement AI? How do you more efficiently grow your business? How do you grow your business, but also maintain and increase margins, right? So if you can if you can deliver any services or resell hardware in a more efficient manner, you're obviously going to have a lot more success. And AI facilitates a lot of that. So excited to focus on finance, excited to focus on payments and some of the things maybe that you're not exactly thinking about. Who is Alternative Payments? We are a platform to streamline your payment workflows. I think about it as the invoice billing and payments workflow. We support over 1,000 MSPs today. We process over $1 billion. We integrate with all the core PSA, accounting, and ERP solutions. And all of what our software does is really meant to drive outcomes. So, I focus much more on the right side of the screen. And this is really how we evaluate the success of our business is, are we able to successfully implement our software, work with you and your teams to drive down the time it takes for you to get paid? And the data would show you that we are very successful in doing that. Our clients collect in an average of 5 days relative to an industry average of about 35 days. About 60% of all of our payment volume is fully automated. So that means that your clients aren't lifting a finger. They're not manually going in to pay a bill. We have a credit card, a bank account on file. We're running all of those payments. What does that do? That results in a huge amount of time savings. And so if we can get you paid faster while saving your team's time, then it's obviously a valuable solution. We partner that software solution with a best-in-class support mechanism. And again, we're all about data. We don't just talk. Talk is cheap, in my opinion. So we show you the data in terms of what are the results. We run customer satisfaction surveys. We run NPS surveys. And the data would imply, that we are very successful in supporting your businesses with these initiatives around payment automation, finance automation more broadly. So, we have best-in-class NPS scores that vastly exceed what kind of industry or averages are across MSPs, financial services, and software. We have very, very strong customer satisfaction rating. and we're available. We're available whenever you need us. We're happy to work with you on implementation planning. We're happy to talk to your clients about why online payments are valuable and why getting rid of checks is an important driver of growth for both companies. And we're proactive about how we do things. Again, this kind of doubles down a little bit on the first slide in terms of what we do, but we automate workflows. We integrate with all your core technology stack. We have a multi-tenant environment, which supports both your end clients, if you have complicated end clients who have multi-tenant environments, as well as your business, right? If you're acquiring a lot of MSPs, or you have multiple geographies that you support, or you have multiple PSAs or multiple accounting softwares, and you're a little bit more complex of an operation, we can support that. We also, lastly, offer multiple flexible payment methods. So ACH, credit card, financing, the whole world's kind of your oyster in terms of what we offer. Again, back to impact, these are just two customers of ours who've been longstanding customers. The before and after in terms of what we're able to do within these customer accounts is pretty incredible. So for S1 technology, we've reduced collection times by about 70%. We drove adoption to an increase of 90% from basically checks. Triada, similarly, collections time cut in half, and everything's automated for these businesses. So quick summary of where we are. Now I'm going to dig into the MSP finance landscape. The goal will be to run through these slides in about 25 minutes. Obviously time is super valuable. I don't want to keep you guys here for an hour, but again, if you have questions, if you want me to double down, just feel free to make a comment or ask a question in the Q&A section. To kick things off, just to kind of level set the crowd and understand where we are, we're going to run a quick survey around what your finance stack looks like and kind of where you're having challenges. Again, the goal of this is really just to help us craft additional content and also focus in on different areas that you want to focus in on. So if you have a second to fill that out, that would be greatly appreciated. So taking a step back, right? Financial functions really comprise of three key areas. You have accounts receivable, you have your recording and accounting packages, and then you have an accounts payable. In the MSP landscape, what's interesting is really the AR area is the only area that companies have really automated, right? Connect Booster was one of the first companies in the industry, the beloved tool, still is a beloved tool in many respects. And then obviously people are using accounting packages, and a lot of the accounts payable is still what I would kind of consider white space. Even when you look at this landscape, what's fascinating to me is everybody talks about how accounts receivable is already automated or how their reporting is automated to a degree. But in the accounts receivable space, only about 10% of MSPs are utilizing a solution that plugs into their PSAs and that plugs into their accounting solution to automate that workflow. Obviously,
why do you think that is?
I think it's an area that people aren't focused on, right? It's an area where people are very focused on automating everything to the PSA and creating that invoice. And they don't necessarily double click on, once that invoice has been created, how do we get paid for that invoice? Or they're concerned about ruffling the feathers of their end client and are happy just to get paid, as opposed to get paid on time or accelerate payments, because everybody's very customer centric and they're worried about causing concerns downstream. Now, as the technology improves and as the landscape improves, right, and as AI is more adaptable and the workflows are more flexible and customizable, then it becomes much more seamless. So one of those things that I think is really interesting, that AI can do, that we'll get into, that we're doing a little bit of, is automating email deliverability and messaging to your clients. So if we know that Steve is a client of Baxter's and Steve pays his bills on Monday at 8 a.m., instead of sending him an email on Sunday or Saturday, we'll send him an email on Monday at 7:30 a.m. So it's top of his inbox, right? And so we're streamlining that process for Steve. Steve doesn't need to go search his email inbox. He doesn't need to write a check. He doesn't need to log into chase.com and make that payment. That invoice and that email is right at the top of his inbox, right when he's ready to pay that bill. And so as we start understanding customer behavior with the data set that we have, right? I mean, we're processing 50, 60,000 transactions a month right now. We can then start to automate this distribution and follow up of invoices, right? We may know that Steve needs 3 emails before he pays the bill, right? And so if you can then send those emails in a shorter period of time, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, then Steve may pay on Thursday. And so you can use these data and analytics to then drive action and drive behavior that are completely innovative in the space, haven't been done before, but again, are driving outcomes, which we're very focused on. And then on the accounts payable side, people handle this in many, many different ways. A lot of people don't think about it because they're logging into, D&H or Pax8 or Ingram Micro to make those payments. And that's 80% of their operating costs or cost of goods sold. And they're not thinking about the kind of one-off invoice, but, automating that and streamlining that, could be valuable. And so a lot of your companies, right? I mean, depending on the size, either have one person who's dedicated to AR and AP. You may do it yourself as the CEO. Your wife or whoever may do it as the CFO or VP of finance.
Here on this,
or you may have multiple people within your company that are performing these services. And so, what does that mean? That just means that a lot of these processes remain very manual, right? People are continuing to send out invoices manually. People are receiving payments from your clients and then reconciling things manually. And all that does, it just creates room for error. It slows down the process and creates challenges internally for you as a business. There are also then a handful of just compliance risks, right? Around PCI compliance. If you're taking credit card numbers over the phone and writing credit cards down on a napkin, some of these things expose you to potential risk and fines, from the card networks. And so managing that risk and making sure that you're utilizing a solution that is PCI compliant is obviously important. It's also important for your end clients, right? So as you think about continuing to expand your scope as the technological advisor to your clients, or, if we're in the Pax8 world of the managed intelligence platform, it's really, really important that you're thinking about these things for your clients to drive more value-added services.
You mentioned writing credit card numbers down in a napkin or something, and I know that was obviously a little tongue-in-cheek, but for those of you that don't know, I ran an MSP for almost 15 years, and it's kind of crazy the things that your customers will do. I'm not saying I would just be like, hey, write this down on some paper and give it to me, but I'd have customers that would just email me their credit card information. I'm like, what are you doing? So unfortunately, and here's where I started to panic, Baxter, because I never really got deep into compliance stuff. I got out of running an MSP before compliance was number one for everyone, right? So tell me, if somebody else emails me their credit card number, do I now have a PCI DSS compliance issue?
Yeah, of course, right? Because that information is living in your inbox, right? And so by definition, you're storing that credit card information.
Now, if I delete that email, is that enough? And obviously delete it from the deleted box.
Yeah, depends if emails are ever deleted, right? I mean, you only have an issue when you have an issue, and that's the challenge that a lot of us are trying to solve, right? In terms of compliance and risk is, and a lot of MSPs fire their clients, right? Who don't necessarily approach security in the same way, shape, and form that they do, right? And if you make a recommendation as an MSP, you need to assess how much risk there is, because when there are cyber attacks and other challenges, obviously it's on your plate to solve. Um,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, these processes just slow us down, right? So we talked about days sales outstanding, we talked about days payable, draining cash flow, making it challenging to plan, making it challenging to close your books on time. And then there's also a risk associated with bad debt, right? So do you know if your clients are going to pay you or not? Um, and this is some of the areas where I think AI can help us tremendously in terms of assessing those risks, assessing those client profiles, that we'll get into in a few minutes, which I think are really, really interesting new use cases in the market. Um, Billing workflows are antiquated. I'll spend 2 seconds on this slide, but one of the challenges is that the PSA automation tooling for invoicing is quite complicated, right? So your PSA sits kind of core to your stack, and you're automating all these workflows to the PSA to optimize that invoice and optimize that workflow. And so, what does that mean? You have quotes coming out, you have CRM and invoicing, ticketing, all integrated in your PSA. You obviously have the downstream payments, and then you obviously also have your accounting ERP solution, and these all plug in together. And so, if things aren't streamlined and integrated appropriately or automated, again, creates some challenges around these manual workflows. So I'll segue a little bit into some of the kind of massive opportunities that we see around automation and AI, and we'll classify these in a couple different manners. So on the top right, this is an automation slide. I don't really think about RPA as AI at the end of the day. I think about it more as automation, but I think about it as pillars as well, right? So it's very hard to integrate AI-based workflows or AI use cases if you haven't hit pillar number one or pillar number two. And so, the core area here is really thinking about, how do you reach some of those kind of more basic pillar 1, 2 automation workflows, right? So, invoice generation and deliverability, is your PSA perfectly set up where your invoices are clean and they can be distributed in an automated fashion? Question number one, if it is, then, alternative payments can plug in. We can create cadences. We can distribute those invoices on specific time sequences to get the best results. Same thing with payment prediction, right? If now we are running a payment, we can then predict when those clients are going to pay. If we know that Steve always pays on Thursdays, we can tell you that your cash flow is going to be positive on Thursdays from Steve's payment. And so as you get through the automation phase, you can then start to understand your business a little bit deeper, which then obviously allows you to invest and double down into the areas that you want to invest in. Dispute resolution is a really interesting one where I know MSPs have a lot of challenges around disputes, right? Because you're sending a lot of invoices for a lot of different hardware and services and reselling of licensing and software. And Baxter may raise his hand and says, hey, well, actually, we didn't have 33 seats. We had 35 seats, right? And so if you can utilize tooling that makes it very clear to the client as to how many seats him or her are utilizing, then again, it creates a much more streamlined process. On the accounts payable,
I love that you think one of our customers are going to reach out and say, oh man, I hate to tell this to you, but we're not paying you enough money.
I mean, it happens all day long, right? It's and it's not only in the MSD market, right? It's in every market. I think the MSPs business models have a lot of similarities to a lot of other businesses. The challenge at the end of the day is that the complexity of the business model for MSPs is just hyper complex, right? And you're providing one-time services, you're doing projects, you're reselling hardware, you're reselling software, you need a license management solution, and that really creates these potential disputes downstream. So, it's a constant battle, and we speak to MSPs all day long who have a myriad of these different challenges. Um, Accounts payable is a very interesting workflow from an automation perspective, because we always want to tie, whatever we're selling to obviously what we're buying and understanding the margin profile. And so if you can match those invoices and code those invoices accurately, and everybody has a little bit of a different system for what they're doing, and we're trying to help normalize this, you can really understand profitability by customer. Again, you can get a level deeper to understand that. Simultaneously with kind of approval workflows, again, another just automation piece. Maybe Steve is in charge of paying this specific bill. And so I want to make sure that Steve has ownership of that department or that relationship with Ingram Micro. And so every single bill that comes in, I'd like Steve to review it and then click approve. And so some of these workflows, help operationalize your businesses, drive level of sophistication that you may or may not have today. But again, from a compliance and risk perspective, ensures that money's going to the right area. We talked a little bit about cash flow optimization on payment prediction, but again, if you can predict payments, incoming payments, then you can also optimize outgoing payments, right? And so if we use this terminology, which I love to use, and MSPs utilize it all the time, of not being the bank, right? The only time we're not the bank is if we guarantee that we're getting paid before we're paying. Mm-hmm. So if you can guarantee accounts receivable or the incoming workflows, then you can optimize the outgoing workflows. And so you can coordinate your net working capital, right? The difference between accounts receivable and accounts payable in a very seamless fashion.
Now, I want to say this. As a small MSP, you might only have 50 or fewer payments a month, right? And it's easy for you to just kind of know who's paid you, because there's so few of the payments. You just know, right? So how do you scale that? Because once you start managing 500 payments or 1,000 payments a month, it doesn't sound like something that I can just know off the top of my head. And then it also seems much more complicated to try and manage making sure people pay you before you start ordering equipment, for example.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and it's really in phases. And it's, I'm the first proponent of, you don't want to use solutions that you don't want to use, right? And so you need to make an assessment as a business owner as to how you value your time at the end of the day. And maybe if you're only having 10 payments a month, maybe it's something that you can manage yourself. And then the question is, when you get to 20, can you still manage it or not? When you get to 30, can you still manage it or not? When you get to 40, kind of same question. And there are two routes, I think, that once you get to 40 or 50 payments a month, or even 30 payments a month, is, do you want to hire somebody whose responsibility is accounts receivable? Or are there solutions that can automate the workflow and then scale with you from that point? And so, when we think about where we fit into the market, and where just payment automation on the receivable side fits into the market, I really kind of think about it as that 20 to 30 invoices a month. It starts to become interesting. Now it depends on how much you're paying for payment processing, and we can kind of get into that and always, evaluate your business and whether there's a right fit. I'm not a big proponent of selling software or telling people to use software solutions that aren't the right fit. And I believe pretty vehemently in that, right? It has to be well aligned with where you want to go as a business and where you see the growth and trajectory of your business. But when you're utilizing a solution, you can then automate it. And many of our customers have 100% of their invoices that are fully automated with a payment method on file. And the only thing that they kind of need to manually manipulate or audit is the dispute side, right? Or the questions on the billing side. And so that, streamlines a lot of time for owners and operators. And, it allows them to focus more of their time on revenue growth or acquiring new customers or service delivery. Right. And it's
Mhm.
all, I mean, I have the same issue, right? Is how do you, Baxter, how do you prioritize your time? Right. We have 55 people, or probably end the year at about 70 people. And where do I see the most value being added? For me, it's not on accounts receivable, but where is it? So that's a key question that I think we all need to kind of look in the mirror and answer for ourselves.
It's accounts payable, isn't it?
And it's accounts payable, exactly. The flip side. Um, So, now getting into some of the fun, around analytics and reporting, which I think is a really, really big use case and opportunity in the MSP space, right? I think a lot of companies reporting is not where it needs to be, or it's really reactive, right? So at the month's end, you have a good understanding of what your books and records look like, but during the month, it's a little bit of a question mark, or maybe it's 15 days after month end, because you need to wait for your accountant to close your books. What does this do? This creates a number of pain points, right? So your data is stuck in multiple systems. You can't aggregate that data. Teams, you or your teams are waiting, for other people to kind of close your records or run um, analyses. And then obviously, this raw data from all these systems is just challenging to kind of consume and understand. Um, you know, AI streamlines that in a central database, streamlines that, right? So now you have all of your information in one system. The PSA at the end of the day is basically just a wrapper. It's just a wrapper on a database, and makes it a little bit more accessible for people to operate. But if you have all of that information or that central nervous system of your business in a database, and you can query it, right, and you can evaluate the data from PSA to accounting to ERP, again, you have this streamlined, beautiful perspective of, how many clients do you have? How quickly are they paying you? What are they purchasing? What's the SKU counts? What's your inventory? How quickly are you moving inventory? You can start to answer a lot of those questions. The first step is obviously just kind of reporting, right? Which, I think about as more static. Now it could be updated daily or it could be updated weekly. But then the next question is, using tools like natural language processing or, chat GPT type experiences where you can just ask, real world question, right? What's my forecast variance by region, which is a pretty complicated question to ask that, may be pretty challenging today. The then second step of this puzzle, which I find even more interesting, is really around enriching the data, right? So if you can understand, the SKUs that you're purchasing from D&H relative to Ingram Micro, and you clearly know that one SKU is cheaper at D&H versus Ingram Micro, and you can make additional profit on that SKU by ordering from D&H, again, you're driving revenue growth, you're driving margin expansion, but that opportunity is only really available to, the most sophisticated of operators who have this kind of database infrastructure and who are piping in this data.
Now, hold on a second. Because you're talking about, you're talking about getting like pricing data from distributors. I feel like isn't that something that we can already do if we've got like a quoting tool and what is it, the Eatalize or whatever those wrappers that plug into distributors do? Why would we need that in the payment platform instead of the
Well,
quoting?
it's not, I don't think about it as in the payment platform specifically. I think about it as like this holistic imaging, right, of your entire business, right? And so if you can tie the vendor payment to the accounts receivable or to the downstream receipt of that payment, you can understand profitability. So, let's give just a basic example. If D&H is selling you a SKU for $10 and Ingram Micro is selling you a SKU for $20 and you're reselling that SKU for $30, Now, you know that that customer is less profitable if they're buying it from Ingram for $20 because you're only making $10 on that SKU. But D&H out there is selling it for 10 and you have the opportunity to make $20 from that SKU. And so tying these items together, right? These are disparate solutions. And one of the challenges in the MSP market is people are using a lot of different tooling, right? But if we can aggregate this tooling into one database system, we can start to spot these differences. So now you know that you're going to go order that SKU from D&H. It may seem like a small amount of money, $10, but as your business grows, as you're selling more of those SKUs, it also may be across multiple SKUs, right? Maybe there's a difference in a delta between a lot of the different distributors and a lot of the different products. It also, gives you a better opportunity to negotiate pricing with some of these distributors. So again, from a operationalization perspective, it allows you to operate at a more higher level and drive margin expansion and drive revenue growth, which is
a
what
really
I
good
think is
point.
more exciting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, Baxter, I don't know if you remember, we had an office hours a few months ago where we had somebody come teach all about procurement. And one of the things that they recommended was you need to have somebody like in charge of procurement at your MSP, no matter the size. And by doing that, now you'll have somebody who can kind of own the whole purchasing department, right? And they'll be able to look and see, okay, we've spent this much with these distributors. We know we've purchased this many firewalls over the last 12 months. We anticipate purchasing this many more over the next 12 months. And then, yeah, like you said, you can start to negotiate special pricing and all sorts of great deals. You can start getting net terms. You can get credit and all sorts of great things when you start to focus on procurement. And like you said, as little as that seems like you're saving, $20 on a computer here, $50 on a server there, it really does all add up because, sure, maybe you're small now, maybe you only have 50 or fewer invoices today every month. But once you have 500 or 1,000, all of those purchases really start to add up, especially as you start looking at some of the other things you're procuring, like Microsoft Office licensing.
Yeah. The thing that I find, most exciting is that with some of these solutions and the innovation that we're seeing in this market, you may not even need that person, right? And so you can actually understand the data by yourself, or maybe somebody on your team can handle AR, AP, and procurement, right? And so our ability to operate more efficiently as individuals or as teams increases tremendously. This is another massive area of opportunity in the MSP market, which is just proper forecasting and planning, right? And so going back to this example where, I know that Steve plays on Thursdays. Well, I know that all my other 50 to 100 customers pay on Wednesdays or Tuesdays, right? And so that allows you to then understand cash flow to a new way, in a new manner, and allows you to accelerate that cash flow, which then you can then decide what you want to do with that cash, whether you want to invest in go-to-market, whether you want to invest in marketing, whether you want to invest in new tooling, whether you want to invest in new different solutions that are out there, right? And so, this chart on the left, kind of provides, a little bit of insight as to how to do that, right? And so step number one is really unifying the data inputs, which is the biggest challenge, right? So, we have a PSA solution, but you need to integrate with your ERP solution. You need to integrate with HubSpot or your CRM or whatever you're utilizing on customer pipeline. And then as you kind of run down the gamut here, you can start to predict revenue, predict cash flow. You can run simulations as to whether Steve pays early or what if all my customers pay early? What is the impact? And that again allows you to forecast in a much more streamlined fashion. What we see as a business, and this is a little bit of a call out for, what we do as a business, but, we provide you the dashboards to allow you to assess the payments that are external to alternative payments and the payments that are internal. So an external payment would be like a check, right? Customer receives an email. Hey, Steve, you owe me $100. I'm going to now write a check. I'm going to drop it in the mail. That payment is obviously received a little bit more delayed relative to if a bank account's on file and we're just processing that payment. And step one for us is providing you that type of insight. Step two, which we're building today, is providing you the ability to then really forecast and plan accordingly based off of more of these data points to better understand your business and better predict the future of your business.
That's pretty cool. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of AI. I know it makes a ton of mistakes when used incorrectly. And I know that there's a lot of people who speculate down to the day when Terminator will rise up and we'll and we will become extinct as humans. But seriously though, I really am a fan of AI. I use it as much as I possibly can. I would love to figure out how to use it better because I know there's so much more it can do than some of the real simple things I'm doing with it today. So to see that we're going to start implementing it for finance is cool.
Totally. So I'll wrap up in about 5 minutes, and I'll try to rattle off these slides quickly just to be cautious of your time. But again, if you guys have thoughts or comments, feel free to ask any questions. So a lot of this is also around strengthening your controls as a business owner and the risk associated with challenges around controls and compliance. And so, what does this mean? This means that ensuring that, a payment that's made to the vendor is the right vendor, right? There's a lot of email spoofing. It's funny, as a business, we receive invoices every week from vendors that we don't do business with that say, hey, you owe us money. And it's really challenging at times to kind of navigate, the invoices that are real versus fake across a team of 60 people, because we don't necessarily know what engineering's buying relative to product, relative to sales, relative to customer success. But those audit trails are really, really important in making sure that you're punching in the bank accounts, appropriately, right? And making sure that the money is going to the right person. There's a ton of fraud, right? That's a very good example of fraud from an email spoofing perspective. There's a great story the other day of, I think, somebody in the Ukraine who was billing Meta and I think Salesforce like tens of millions of dollars of invoices that they didn't have the right systems in place, and they were approving these invoice payments to this guy who had created a shell company, and I think he fraudulently received something like $150 million because some of these really, really large technology platforms didn't have the internal controls. And so that fraud and risk detection is really important, both both across your finance function. And then, policy monitoring, right? So, this allows us to implement a policy and then create red flags around where the policy is playing out, right? Did Steve have approval to purchase that coffee or that beer or that Diet Coke or whatever it is? And if you can detect anomalies, then again, you can increase your margins, right? Because you're not spending for superfluous things, and you're more structurally organized as a business. Now, this is kind of like the holy grail that I would say. Today as an industry, we're really only in this kind of AR automation workflow. Down the road, we will be in this kind of full payment automation workflow. So AR will be automated to your MSP. AP will also be automated to your vendors. And so that just really accelerates the stack for your business. It allows you to automate those workflows. And when you then have an AI layer on top of it, it allows you to decrease risk. It allows you to detect anomalies. It allows you to operate your business with, obviously, people who are really driving value from a revenue perspective, as opposed to, having a lot of people managing these workflows and manually detecting, right? It allows MSP of 1 or an MSP of 3 to drive much more revenue growth and opportunity. than ever before. And this is what really gets us out of bed and gets us really excited. Um, the last kind of final slide here really is, it's just the beginning. I think the three opportunities that we've talked about are really payment predictability. And so really understanding and triggering these types of opportunities so that you can understand when customers are paying you. Credit risk detection is something that we haven't mentioned, which I think is a big opportunity that's coming soon, right? So what if one of your company customers is filed for bankruptcy and you didn't know, or maybe they're about to file for bankruptcy and you don't know? Implementing credit tools and risk assessment tools as part of your both vendor base as well as your customer base allows you to proactively evaluate the ecosystem that you're participating in, and detect challenges and detect risk before you know it. And this allows you to get ahead of it. There's a lot of embedded solutions that make this come a reality, right? And so you can utilize a risk tooling like Dun & Bradstreet right out of your platform, out of your portal, right, via an API. And then, the last piece, which we've talked about a lot, which also has to do with this kind of continued full payment automation, is around the ecosystem connectivity, right? So if you can connect your PSA to your ERP and ensure that both workflows are streamlined appropriately, connect it with your bank feeds so that you know what's happening in terms of the money inflows and outflows. Again, this allows you to empower yourselves, empower your business, and grow in the ways in which you want to grow. So with that, really, really thank you all for your time. We're going to run another just quick poll again, just as kind of a feedback loop. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them. If you're interested in learning more about us and what we do and where we fit in the market, you can take a picture of this QR code. It'll send you to a URL to book a demo with us. But really, really appreciate your time. It's been fantastic. Here's my email. This is my personal email and personal cell phone. If you want to give me a call, shoot me a text message. I love talking about these things. I love engaging with these things. We'd be happy to help you in any way we can, on a total no frills basis, because this is what I do. So thank you all.
Yeah. So hey, I want to open it up. Let's call this Ask Me Anything. Oh, he's even got it on the slide. Great. So if you guys have questions, whether it's about getting paid, making payments, finance, accounting, life, just let us know. What's did we talk about any international stuff yet?
Yeah, we'll answer a few of these questions here.
Yeah.
Today, our customers are US based. We're expanding into Canada at the end of this month. We'll be able to support every Canadian bank. From an infrastructure perspective, we integrate with the PSA, we integrate with your accounting package, and then we also integrate with your bank. The banking integration is really just meant for payouts. So what does that mean? When we receive payments from your customers, we then aggregate those into a batch at the end of every single day, and we pay you out based on that batch. We can pay out all banks. We are set up for PAD and pre-authorized debits in Canada, which obviously is a hugely important concept in that market. So we've automated that pre-authorized debit workflow for the Canadian market, and super, super excited about that. Please get in touch with us and we can walk you through the product and in more detail.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, pardon my ignorance, but as an American who doesn't travel, I know that they don't do ACH in Canada and many other countries. And then you mentioned pre-authorized debit. I think that's what they do instead.
Yeah, I mean, ACH, Interact, bank transfer are all very similar mechanisms for bank transactions, which is the basic way of putting it, right? So there's a debit, which is a pull of funds from a bank. In some markets like Canada, you need to be pre-authorized by the client to pull those funds. And in the US, you actually don't have to be pre-authorized, which is kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, that seems like a
But in
security flaw to me.
I don't think it's a security flaw necessarily. The bigger challenge is that, in the banking world and in the US is there's something like 3,000 different banking institutions. In Canada, I think they're, 10 or 20, or they're in, less than 100. And so some of these banks are just not set up for that kind of more sophisticated infrastructure. And, the regulators do not want to implement something that's going to put a bunch of regional or community banks out of business. And so it's a little bit of this push-pull dynamic. But in Canada, the market's quite tight in terms of what's allowed from a debiting perspective. One of the, I think, best kept secrets, which shouldn't be a secret at this time, but is when a client writes you a check, they're actually sending you their account and routing number. The account and routing number are right on the bottom of the check. And if you do have the ability, not every company has this ability, but if you do have the ability from your bank to pull funds, you can literally just plug in the accounting and routing number into a bank and pull funds from that client. So if Steve writes me a check for $50 and I'm a fraudulent actor, I can plug in his account number, routing number, and pull $500 from his account. The only way Steve would ever know that I've pulled $500 is if he's logged in and seen that pull. And so, in some markets, we need to be on high alert and make sure that we're reconciling these transactions and understanding, what is being pulled and what's being paid from these accounts. So there's some, again, risk compliance components, depending on different markets that you operate in. And it's super important to not only educate ourselves, right, but educate the market and our end clients who are paying via check to try to drive this online adoption, because it is more compliant, it is safer, it is faster, it does streamline and automate the workflows, and there's myriad of other benefits that I haven't mentioned.
Very nice. One of the things that so I mentioned earlier, guys, I was an MSP. Just real briefly, I joined alternative payments because I really enjoy this software. I think what Baxter and this team have created is really special. I think we're building at a much more rapid pace than any other platform in this industry right now. And look out, because we're going to do big things. But one thing, what really grinds my gears, Baxter, I'm going to go all Peter Griffin for a moment. So when a company in the channel acquires another company because they want that software,
We're not for sale.
we're not for sale. But then that company doesn't actually integrate it into their platform. They're just like, hey, let's just bolt this on and sell it to our existing user base. So not that anyone that's ever done anything like that, but I feel like this is a great segue to say we have a ConnectWise sync tool.
We have a ConnectWise sync tool. We have a collections assist. We have a lot of interesting, I think, features that no one else in the market's providing. And again, excited to continue to build for you guys and continue to innovate in the market. And we really appreciate all your support. And if we can ever be helpful, don't hesitate to reach out. We could be helpful from a workflow automation perspective. Really appreciate your time. So with that, thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you at a conference or seeing you in your market sometime soon. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.